My daughter told me to stay quiet and stop interfering with my grandkids. So I did, and she learned how hard it is without the nannies I paid for. Comment below where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories of transformation. I still remember the exact moment I realized my daughter hated me. It wasn't when she took control of my finances after Robert died, or when she moved me into her house, a house I would later discover my husband had purchased in my name. No, it was the look in her eyes across the dinner table as she cut me off mid-sentence. "Mom, nobody wants to hear those old stories," Rebecca said, her voice dripping with disdain as I tried to tell my grandchildren about their grandfather's love for astronomy. Mason, my 12-year-old grandson, snickered, mimicking his mother's eye roll. My throat tightened as I clutched my napkin under the table. 5 years of these small cruelties had worn me down to nothing but a shell of the literature professor I once was. My days had become an endless cycle of waking at 5:30 a.m. to prepare breakfast, packing lunches, driving the kids to school, and using my modest retirement to pay for their extracurricular activities. "Can I help with your science project tonight, Mason?" I asked, desperate to connect with my grandson. Rebecca reached for her third glass of wine. "Mom, that's not how things are done nowadays. You're completely outdated." She turned to her son. "I'll help you later. Grandma wouldn't understand the assignment anyway." I swallowed hard, forcing a smile as 9-year-old Lily looked up from her plate with concerned eyes. "Why does Grandma look sad?" she asked innocently. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I whispered, though the knife in my heart twisted deeper. After dinner, as I stood alone washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the window, a faded woman with slumped shoulders. When had I become this person? The woman who canceled her retirement trip to Italy, who abandoned her dream of writing a memoir, who now existed solely to serve her daughter's family while being constantly reminded of her inadequacy. "You barely know how to use a smartphone, Mom. How do you expect to write a book?" Rebecca had laughed when I mentioned my writing aspirations last month. I dried a plate, remembering how I once commanded lecture halls, how students would line up after class to discuss literature with me, how Robert would proudly introduce me as the brilliant Dr. Walker at faculty events. Now, I was just confused old mom who should be grateful her daughter managed her finances. The kitchen door swung open. Rebecca stood there, wineglass in hand. "The kids need help with their baths," she said, not a request, but a command. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about the small vacation property I inherited from my parents. How is the rental income?" Her face hardened instantly. "Really, Mom? Now? I give you $500 a month from your pension, which is what's left after expenses. That property barely covers property taxes. You should be grateful I handle everything for you." She handed me a simplified bank statement. Without my reading glasses, I couldn't make out the figures. But I nodded anyway. What choice did I have? Later that night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she wrapped her small arms around my neck. "I love your stories, Grandma," she whispered. I held her tightly, tears threatening to spill. This child's love was all that kept me going some days. As I closed her bedroom door, I heard Rebecca on the phone in the hallway. "My mother? She's just a lonely old woman with no life of her own. Of course I can reschedule. It's not like she has anything else to do." I froze, my hand still on the doorknob, as my daughter's cruel words washed over me. In that moment, I didn't know it yet, but the fuse to my liberation had just been lit. My 63rd birthday arrived with little fanfare in October 2023. I'd been up since dawn preparing a special breakfast for the family, hoping that today might be different. It wasn't. Rebecca and the children stumbled in 2 hours late, a hastily purchased cake in a plastic container. While I unwrapped my present, a generic gift card, Rebecca spent most of the time on her phone. "I thought you should choose something yourself," she said dismissively. "We never know what you really like anyway." Lily's voice piped up. "Why is Grandma crying? Doesn't she like the present?" I quickly wiped my eyes. "I'm just happy, sweetheart." The truth was far more complex. 5 years ago, in 2018, when Robert died suddenly of a heart attack, I was drowning in grief. The diagnosis came 6 months later: clinical depression. Rebecca had swooped in, taking control of everything. "You're in mourning, Mom. You're not mentally stable. I'll handle all this for you." I'd been grateful then, too shattered to question her, the antidepressants making my mind foggy and compliant. This was 2 years after Rebecca's own bitter divorce from James in 2016. He had moved to Seattle, allegedly abandoning his family. "He never cared about us," Rebecca would tell the children, "just like he never cared about his job." I'd never questioned this narrative. Now my life revolved around serving her family. When Rebecca suggested selling my comfortable home in Cambridge, claiming maintaining it would be too stressful in my condition, I agreed. The proceeds, nearly $950,000, went into an account Rebecca managed for my future care. I kept only a small vacation property in the Berkshires inherited from my parents, a property Rebecca now managed. Every morning, I prepared breakfast and lunches for the children. Every afternoon, I drove them to activities. Every evening, I cooked dinner while Rebecca worked late or attended networking events that often left her smelling of alcohol. The next day, during Mason's parent-teacher conference, his teacher smiled warmly at me. "Mason's homework has improved dramatically. I can tell he's getting wonderful support at home." Before I could respond, Rebecca interjected, "Actually, I help him with the important parts. My mother just sits with him when I have no alternative." The teacher's smile faltered, and I shrank into my seat, cheeks burning with humiliation. I noticed Ms. Patel's concerned glance between Rebecca and me, but she said nothing more. Later that week, Rebecca criticized the meal I'd spent hours preparing. "This processed garbage is poison. Are you trying to kill my children with this trash?" She scraped my homemade stew into the garbage disposal while the children watched. That night, I heard Rebecca drinking alone in the darkened kitchen. When I approached, she muttered bitterly, "You were always the perfect mother, weren't you? Dad never stopped talking about how wonderful you were. But I know the truth." She stumbled away before I could respond, leaving me bewildered by this glimpse of a deeper, older resentment I'd never recognized. The next morning, when I suggested the children might miss their father, Rebecca exploded. "They're lucky he's far away. At least he's not around to constantly disappoint them, like you did with me." Her words cut deep, but something had shifted inside me. For the first time since Robert's death, the fog in my mind seemed to lift slightly. Dr. Levine had been gradually reducing my medication over the past year, and I was starting to feel more like myself. I began to wonder if my silence was not protection, but permission. Permission for Rebecca to rewrite our history, to cast me as the villain in her story, to use me as a convenient scapegoat for her own failures. The basement had always been my refuge, the one place Rebecca rarely ventured. After another public humiliation, where she had dismissed my suggestion for Lily's art project with a cutting, "Mom, that's so outdated it's embarrassing," I retreated there to lick my wounds in private. 3 months had passed since my birthday, and each day Rebecca seemed to grow more critical, more dismissive. Her drinking had intensified too. I regularly found empty wine bottles hidden throughout the house. The children walked on eggshells around her unpredictable moods, wiping tears from my eyes. I noticed a stack of boxes labeled Robert's office that I'd never fully unpacked after his death. Grief had made me avoid his belongings, and Rebecca had encouraged this avoidance. "It's too painful for you, Mom. I'll sort through Dad's things." Something compelled me to open the top box. Inside, I found folders of financial documents, including Robert's will, a document Rebecca had told me was simple and didn't require my review. My hands trembled as I discovered a sealed envelope with my name written in Robert's familiar handwriting. "For Eleanor, open after my departure." The seal broke with a soft tear. Inside was a letter and property documents for the very house we were living in, the house Rebecca had told me she purchased after Robert's death to give us all a fresh start. "My dearest Eleanor," Robert's letter began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. I've purchased this house in your name as security for your future. The deed is enclosed, along with account information for my pension and investments. Thomas Wilkins, my attorney, has instructions to assist you. I worry about Rebecca's intentions. She's shown concerning patterns of financial manipulation recently. Please protect yourself, my love." My heart pounded as I dug deeper, discovering the original bank statements showing a monthly pension of $6,000, far more than the $500 Rebecca gave me. I found payment redirection forms with my signature forged, correspondence where Rebecca, impersonating me, informed Robert's company to direct all future contacts through her due to Mom's recent health and cognitive issues. Most devastating was finding documents with my signature transferring rights to the house to Rebecca, a signature I had no memory of providing. Then I saw the date. During those foggy months when I was heavily medicated after Robert's death, had I signed without understanding? Or had she forged this too? I also found statements for the account holding the proceeds from my Cambridge home sale. The balance now showing just $176,000 remaining from the original $950,000. What had happened to the missing $774,000? Beneath these papers lay Robert's journal. My hands shook as I read. Rebecca has always competed with Eleanor for attention since adolescence. I fear her divorce and our efforts to help are fueling this old rivalry. Another entry read, Eleanor is too kind to see it, but I fear our daughter will destroy her when I'm gone. Rebecca shows worrying signs of financial manipulation. The journal contained entries dating back to Rebecca's teen years, revealing a pattern I'd been blind to. Rebecca seems to view Eleanor's accomplishments as a personal affront. When Eleanor received her department award, Rebecca refused to attend the ceremony, claiming it was just another chance for Mom to show off. She doesn't see how Eleanor downplays her achievements to avoid triggering this competition. The final entry, dated 1 week before his death, stated, bought the new house in Eleanor's name. Rebecca doesn't know. Prepared everything with my attorney, Thomas Wilkins. If anything happens to me, he'll know what to do. I've also set aside a special legal fund that only Thomas can access in case Eleanor needs to defend herself against Rebecca's manipulations. I sat on the cold basement floor, stunned by the magnitude of my daughter's betrayal. 5 years of gaslighting, manipulation, and theft, all while I cooked her meals, raised her children, and accepted her crumbs of affection. A sound from upstairs jolted me back to reality. I quickly returned everything to the box except for Robert's letter and the property deed, which I slipped into my sweater pocket. That night, I lay awake replaying every interaction, seeing them through new eyes. Rebecca's management of my finances, her insistence that I couldn't understand modern banking, her dismissal of my concerns as confusion, her strategic isolation of me from friends and former colleagues. Most painful was realizing how she used the children as pawns, encouraging Mason to mock my outdated ways, while simultaneously relying on me to raise them while she built her career and drank away her evenings. Elder financial abuse is more common than most people realize, Margaret Reynolds said, her eyes kind but sharp behind tortoiseshell glasses. The retired family attorney took a sip of her tea, studying me across the community center table, especially when perpetrated by adult children. I'd found the senior support group by chance, a flyer at the library where I'd gone to use a computer privately. Away from Rebecca's watchful eyes, I'd searched financial manipulation of elderly parents and discovered I wasn't alone. Far from it. I'm not sure if that's what's happening, I said cautiously, still protective of Rebecca despite everything. My daughter says she's helping me. Margaret's eyebrow arched slightly. By giving you an allowance from your own pension? By forging your signature? By lying about property ownership? She leaned forward. Eleanor, that's not help. That's criminal. I flinched at the word. She's still my daughter. And you're still a person with rights, Margaret countered. Do you have documentation of these discrepancies? I nodded, thinking of the files hidden in my room. Some. And my husband mentioned an attorney in his letter, Thomas Wilkins. You should contact him immediately, Margaret advised. Discreetly. I have no money for legal help, I confessed. Rebecca controls everything. Margaret's expression softened. Let me make some calls. Boston Legal Aid for Seniors might be able to provide initial consultation. And if your husband truly set aside funds, as you mentioned, they can help you access those resources. 2 days later, I sat in Thomas Wilkins' office under the pretense of taking Mason to the dentist. The gray-haired attorney looked genuinely shocked to see me. Mrs. Walker, I've been trying to reach you for years. My confusion must have shown on my face because he quickly pulled out a thick file. After Mr. Walker's funeral, I attempted to contact you regarding his estate planning. Your daughter intercepted all communications, claiming you were emotionally fragile. She presented documents, which I now suspect were forged, giving her power of attorney. Why did you stop trying? I asked, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. Wilkins looked away, shame evident. I have no excuse that would suffice, Mrs. Walker. I did try for nearly 8 months. I called repeatedly, sent certified letters, even came to your house twice. Each time, Rebecca produced what appeared to be medical documentation of your supposed cognitive decline, very professionally forged. I now realize. She works in financial compliance at Meridian Bank, I explained. She knows how to make documents look legitimate. He pulled out a folder. During that period, I was also dealing with my wife's terminal cancer diagnosis. I'm not offering this as an excuse, merely context. Eventually, with dozens of other clients needing attention and Rebecca's consistent barriers, I failed you and Robert. I should have been more persistent. Were there consequences for you professionally? I asked. He nodded grimly. The Bar Association issued a formal reprimand after your neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, filed a complaint. She'd promised Robert she would check on you. I was placed on probation for a year. I've been trying to make amends ever since, taking on elder abuse cases pro bono. Mrs. Callahan tried to reach me? This was news. Rebecca had told me our former neighbor never visited after the move. Several people did. Rebecca systematically cut you off from everyone who cared about you. He explained that Robert had indeed established a special legal defense fund in anticipation of potential issues with Rebecca. This account can only be used for your legal protection. Rebecca never gained access to it. Boston Legal Aid will assist with the initial investigation, but for the formal proceedings, this fund will cover all expenses. On the drive home, Mason was unusually quiet. "Grandma," he finally said, "was that really a dentist appointment?" My heart sank. "No, sweetheart. It was a legal matter. Are you in trouble?" "No, but I'm trying to fix something important." He nodded solemnly. "Mom sometimes says mean things about you when you're not around. I don't like it." I nearly swerved off the road. "What kinds of things?" "That you're confused, that you forget stuff, that we have to be patient with you because you're old." He looked embarrassed. "But you remember everything. You even remember where I put my homework when I forget. How does that make you feel when she says those things?" He stared out the window. "Bad. Dad always told us to be nice to you. Before he moved, he made us promise to tell him if Mom was mean to you." Back home, I observed with new awareness how Rebecca manipulated not just me, but the children too. Mason was becoming cruel to weaker classmates, mirroring his mother's behavior toward me. Lily showed extreme anxiety about pleasing her mother, apologizing constantly for minor mistakes. That night, I lay awake planning my next steps. This wasn't just about reclaiming my financial independence anymore. It was about protecting my grandchildren from the toxic cycle Rebecca was perpetuating. The woman staring back at me from the mirror was a stranger, hollow-eyed, shoulders curved inward, a permanent apologetic smile fixed on her face. When had I become this person? This shadow? I straightened my spine deliberately, squaring my shoulders the way I used to when entering a lecture hall. My reflection shifted subtly, hints of my former self emerging from beneath years of submission. That morning, I made a critical decision. I would continue my regular routines while secretly reclaiming my life. Each small act of independence would be a brick in the foundation of my new existence. First, I opened a separate bank account at a credit union across town during one of my legitimate grocery shopping trips. When the young banker asked for identification, I felt a surge of validation. I was still legally a person, not just Rebecca's confused mother. "Would you like online access?" she asked. I hesitated, remembering Rebecca's mockery of my technological skills. "Yes," I decided firmly. I would. I established a pattern of weekly grocery shopping trips that consistently took longer than needed, providing cover for my meetings with Margaret or occasionally Wilkins. Rebecca, self-absorbed and trusting in my compliance, never questioned these absences. I scheduled appointments while the children were at school and Rebecca was at work, leaving detailed notes about errands to dispel suspicion. My next step was reconnecting with David Kessler, a certified forensic accountant specializing in financial elder abuse investigations, whom Margaret recommended. "The investigation will take time," he explained during one of my grocery shopping meetings. "We need to document every unauthorized transaction, every forged signature. It's important not to alert your daughter until we have everything in order." "What about the house?" I asked. "According to the records, you are still the legal owner, despite the documents Rebecca attempted to file. Her forgeries weren't convincing enough to transfer the deed. And my vacation property in the Berkshires? On paper, it remains yours," he confirmed, "though Rebecca has been collecting rental income from it, approximately $12,800 monthly that you never see, far from barely covering taxes, as she claimed." That afternoon, I returned home to find Rebecca critiquing Lily's art homework. "This is mediocre at best," she said, as my granddaughter's face crumpled. "You'll never get into a good college with work like this." "I think it's beautiful," I interjected calmly. Studying the watercolor landscape. Rebecca rolled her eyes. Mom, not everyone gets a participation trophy in real life. Lily needs to learn excellence. Perhaps excellence starts with encouragement, I suggested, maintaining eye contact with my daughter for the first time in years. Something flickered in Rebecca's expression. Surprise. Perhaps even unease at this small challenge to her authority. Later that week, Ms. Patel, Mason's teacher, called me directly on my new prepaid phone that Rebecca didn't know about. Mrs. Walker, I'm concerned about some patterns I'm observing with Mason and how he speaks about his home life. Is everything all right? I hesitated. Teachers are mandated reporters for suspected abuse. If I revealed too much, it could trigger an investigation before I was ready. We're going through some adjustments, I said carefully, but I'm addressing the situation. Please know the school has resources available, she replied, understanding my caution. When you're ready to discuss more, I'm here. I also reached out to my former colleague, Sarah Peterson, who had tried contacting me repeatedly after Robert's death. Rebecca had told me Sarah never returned my calls. Another lie. We arranged to meet for coffee during one of my extended shopping trips. We've been worried about you, Sarah confessed. Several of us tried to reach you after Robert passed. Your daughter always said you weren't up for visitors. She isolated me deliberately, I admitted, the reality of Rebecca's manipulation becoming clearer. Sarah promised to help reconnect me with our academic circle, another lifeline emerging. That night, I heard Rebecca on the phone, her voice slurred. My mother is acting strange. No, not dementia, just different, less compliant. A pause. Of course I'm not worried she's found out anything. She can barely operate the microwave. I smiled to myself in the darkness. Let her underestimate me. It had been her mistake all along. 3 months after discovering Robert's documents, subtle changes permeated our household. I'd established a secure routine, weekly errands, that allowed me to meet with Wilkins and the forensic accountant, regular attendance at Margaret's support group, reconnection with former colleagues, and most importantly, deepening my independent relationship with my grandchildren. In the basement, I'd created a small art studio where Lily could express herself freely. Mom says art is a waste of time, she confided one afternoon as we painted together. Art is how we make sense of our feelings, I explained. That's never a waste. For Mason, I'd revived Robert's old telescope, setting it up on the back porch for stargazing sessions. Grandpa loved the stars too? He asked, wonder in his voice. He mapped constellations for years, I told him, sharing stories of Robert that Rebecca had systematically erased from family history. These moments away from Rebecca's critical gaze allowed the children's true personalities to emerge. Lily revealed her anxiety about never meeting her mother's standards. Mason admitted being bullied at school, but hiding it because Mom says it's my fault for being weak. Dad calls us every Sunday when Mom's at her spin class, Mason revealed unexpectedly. Rebecca regularly attended a Sunday morning exercise class, though I suspected it was more social than athletic, given her frequent brunches afterward. We used the tablet he sent us for Christmas. It looks like a game, but it's really a special calling app. He hesitated, then continued. Dad also gave me a separate emergency phone that stays hidden. He said the tablet is for regular check-ins, but the hidden phone is for documenting anything really bad that happens. It's part of what he calls our 2-layer safety system. This explained how the children maintained contact with their father without Rebecca's knowledge. James had found a way to stay connected despite Rebecca's efforts to sever all ties, and had been strategically building evidence all along. Dad told me if things ever got really bad with Mom, I should tell you everything, Mason continued. He says you're the only one who can help us from inside the house. I was carefully documenting these conversations, building not just a financial case against Rebecca, but a complete picture of her emotional manipulation of the entire family. On David Kessler's advice, I'd also begun consulting with Dr. Marlene Chen, a child psychologist who specialized in family trauma, about how best to support my grandchildren through the inevitable upheaval ahead. The children will need stability and professional support, Dr. Chen had advised during our confidential consultation. When financial abuse cases like this come to light, the emotional fallout can be significant, especially for children caught in the middle. My physical transformation was progressing too. I'd begun taking daily walks, straightening my posture, making eye contact during conversations. I'd visited a salon during one of my errands, cutting my shapeless gray hair into a stylish bob that framed my face. Small changes, but significant in reclaiming my identity. Rebecca noticed. "You seem different lately," she remarked suspiciously over dinner. "Almost defiant," I smiled pleasantly. "Just feeling more energetic, dear." "Since when are you seeing Dr. Levine twice a month?" she challenged, having obviously checked the insurance statements that came to the house. "My depression is improving," I replied truthfully. "He's been adjusting my medication." The true test came when Rebecca announced a 2-week business trip. Normally, I would rearrange my entire life to accommodate her schedule. This time, I was prepared. "I'm sorry, but I have an important medical appointment that can't be rescheduled," I informed her calmly. Rebecca stared as if I'd sprouted wings. "Are you serious? After everything I've done for you? I'll have to spend a fortune on babysitters. Perhaps you could use some of your father's pension," I suggested innocently. Her face paled momentarily before she recovered. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, nothing important," I smiled, just thinking aloud. That night, I found Rebecca drinking alone again. An empty wine bottle was hidden under the kitchen sink, and another half-empty one sat on the table. When I asked if everything was all right, she erupted. "Stop pretending you care. You've always judged me, just like Dad did." Her words were slurred, her eyes unfocused. This wasn't the strategic, calculating Rebecca, who managed to fool an attorney and manipulate financial institutions. This was a glimpse of her core insecurity, the wounded daughter who believed she could never measure up. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The 2 weeks of Rebecca's absence transformed our household. Without her looming presence, the children relaxed, visibly. Dinner conversations flowed naturally. Bedtimes became peaceful rituals rather than battlegrounds, and spontaneous laughter, a sound rarely heard before, echoed through rooms that had previously felt like occupied territory. I used this time strategically, gathering documentation and meeting with professionals while the children were at school. Thomas Wilkins confirmed what I'd suspected. Rebecca had systematically redirected my entire financial life into her control through forgery and misrepresentation. "We've documented over $200,000 in misappropriated funds from your pension alone," he explained, showing me spreadsheets detailing every diverted payment, every unauthorized transaction. "As for the proceeds from your Cambridge home sale, we've traced exactly $774,000 to various accounts and expenditures. Large transfers to her personal accounts, luxury purchases, gambling debt payments, and some questionable investments." "How did she get away with this?" I asked, both terrified and exhilarated by the mounting evidence. "Shouldn't banks have safeguards?" "Rebecca works in financial compliance at Meridian Bank," Wilkins reminded me. "She specifically chose to work in the department that designs and implements fraud detection systems. It's like having the blueprint to the bank vault. She knows exactly how to circumvent those safeguards by timing transactions during system upgrades, exploiting administrative overrides, and manipulating the very detection algorithms she helped create. She even scheduled many of her largest transfers during the bank's annual audit blackout periods when transaction monitoring is temporarily suspended. But surely someone would notice eventually." "They did," Wilkins confirmed. "That's why her employer is now investigating her. These schemes inevitably collapse, but they can run for years before detection, especially when perpetrated by someone with insider knowledge." "What happens next?" I asked. "That depends on what you want, Eleanor. We could pursue criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse, or we could negotiate a settlement that restores your assets and establishes boundaries going forward." "What about the children?" My primary concern had shifted from financial justice to their well-being. "That's where things get complicated," he admitted. "Courts generally favor biological parents, even in difficult situations. However, with documented evidence of Rebecca's alcoholism and its impact on the children, coupled with financial exploitation, we might have grounds for a custody hearing. It would be an uphill battle, though. I thought of my grandchildren. I need time to decide. Rebecca returns tomorrow." That evening, I sat with Mason and Lily on the back porch, the telescope positioned toward the emerging stars. "Can we do this when Mom comes back?" Mason asked hopefully. The question broke my heart. "We'll try," I promised, knowing Rebecca would likely forbid these moments once she returned. "Mom doesn't like when we have fun with you," Lily observed with a child's devastating honesty. "She gets that tight face." I pulled her close, Adults have complicated feelings sometimes, sweetheart. Is that why Mom drinks her special juice and gets mean? Mason asked. The question stunned me. I'd suspected Rebecca's drinking was worse than she let on, but I hadn't realized the children were so aware. Has she ever gotten mean when I wasn't around? I asked carefully. Mason and Lily exchanged glances. Sometimes she falls asleep, and we can't wake her up, Lily whispered. Last time, Mason had to make dinner. My blood ran cold. Why didn't you tell me? Mom said you'd try to take us away if we told anyone about her special juice, Mason explained. And Dad told us back in December 2021 to keep a record if Mom ever scared us, but not to tell her we were doing it. That was after Dad came for his Christmas visit and found Mom passed out, Lily added. He was really mad. Can I see what you've been recording? I asked gently. Mason hesitated, then disappeared into the house, returning minutes later with the smartphone hidden in a hollowed-out book that he'd mentioned previously. This is the emergency phone Dad gave me. It's different from our tablet for regular calls. Dad said to use this one only for serious stuff and to keep it extra hidden. The phone contained dozens of videos and photos spanning nearly 18 months. Rebecca passed out on the couch while the children ate cereal for dinner. Rebecca screaming at Lily for spilling milk. Rebecca driving erratically with the children in the car, clearly intoxicated. So James wasn't as disengaged as Rebecca had led me to believe. He had recognized the problem long ago, but had been methodically building a case for custody since that Christmas incident. I needed to contact him directly, but carefully. That night, I added this information to my growing documentation, calling Dr. Chen for guidance on how to address these revelations without further traumatizing the children. Document everything, she advised, but don't put the children in the position of feeling like they're betraying their mother. They need professional support through this process. Rebecca returned home the next day, earlier than expected, catching us in the middle of an art project. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of colorful paintings spread across the dining table. "What's all this?" she demanded, dropping her luggage in the doorway. "Art therapy," I replied calmly. The children enjoyed it. "Therapy?" She spat the word. "Are you implying my children need therapy?" "Everyone benefits from creative expression." I maintained my composure as the children watched our exchange with wide eyes. Rebecca's gaze swept over the happy chaos, landing on a particularly vibrant landscape painting signed by Lily. "This is what you've been doing while I worked 60-hour weeks? Playing with paints?" "We also did our homework and chores," Mason interjected, suddenly protective. Rebecca turned on him. "Don't interrupt adults when they're speaking. Go to your room, both of you." After they left, Rebecca stepped closer, the smell of airport cocktails on her breath. "What game are you playing?" "Mother?" "No game," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Just spending quality time with my grandchildren." "They're my children," she hissed. "And this is my house." I smiled slightly. "Is it?" Something in my tone must have alarmed her, because she stepped back, studying my face with new wariness. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, dear. How was your trip?" For the first time in our long power struggle, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in Rebecca's eyes. She didn't know what I knew, couldn't gauge how much had changed in her absence. This small shift in our dynamic felt monumental. 6 months after discovering Robert's documents, the dynamic in our house had shifted noticeably. My small acts of independence had grown bolder, my connections with the children stronger, and Rebecca's control increasingly tenuous. Mason now came to me first with school questions, trusting my guidance over his mother's demanding perfectionism. Lily showed me her artwork before Rebecca, knowing I would appreciate her creativity rather than criticize its commercial potential. These changes infuriated Rebecca, though she couldn't pinpoint their source. Her drinking had escalated. I regularly found empty bottles hidden throughout the house. "The children seem different lately," she remarked one evening, wineglass in hand. "Less focused on their futures." "They're children," I replied simply. "Their present shapes their future." She narrowed her eyes. "That sounds like something from one of your pretentious lectures, Mother." I merely smiled, no longer wounded by her barbs. My weekly meetings with Margaret's support group had given me perspective. Rebecca's cruelty reflected her insecurities, not my worth. During this period, I'd also established discreet communication with James, Mason, and Lily's father. After learning about his instructions to the children, I'd written to him through Dr. Chen's office, explaining the situation. His response had been illuminating. "I've been documenting Rebecca's behavior since before our divorce. Her drinking and emotional manipulation were major factors in our separation, though she's crafted a different narrative. I began building a case for custody back in December 2021, after finding Rebecca unconscious during my Christmas visit while the children were unsupervised. The court had initially dismissed my concerns due to Rebecca's successful professional facade and the character assassination she orchestrated against me. He explained further, I couldn't stay in Boston. She made my professional life impossible after I confronted her about her drinking. She contacted my employers with false accusations of embezzlement, forcing me to resign. Moving was the only way to rebuild financially so I could eventually fight for the kids. The confrontation I'd been anticipating finally came when Rebecca returned from a weekend trip with an announcement. I've sold your vacation property, she declared over dinner. That old cabin was just sitting there wasting money on taxes. I've invested the proceeds in a promising startup. I set down my fork carefully. How interesting. And how exactly did you manage that? What do you mean? I handled the paperwork like I always do. Her confidence was absolute. What Rebecca didn't know was that I was fully aware of her attempted deception. 2 weeks earlier, Wilkins had alerted me that Rebecca had indeed tried to sell the property, forging my signature on the sales documents. The transaction had been flagged and blocked by the legal safeguards we'd put in place. The sale she was announcing was either a lie to cover her failure or a genuine belief that she'd succeeded. So you forged my signature. Again. I stated it calmly, not a question. The children's heads snapped up. Rebecca's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. What are you talking about? Her voice had a dangerous edge. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Rebecca. I maintained eye contact. Just as you know that this house legally belongs to me, not you. Just as you know that my monthly pension is $6,000, not the $500 you've been generously providing. The color drained from her face. You're confused. Mom, your medication. I don't take any medication that affects my cognition, Rebecca. Dr. Levine reduced my antidepressants months ago. Another fiction you've created to maintain control. Mason looked between us, confusion evident. Mom? What does Grandma mean? Rebecca's hand tightened around her wine glass. Nothing, Mason. Grandma is confused about finances. She's always been terrible with money. She forced a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Why do you think I handle everything for her? Because you've been stealing from me for 5 years? I suggested pleasantly. The glass shattered in Rebecca's grip, red wine spilling across the white tablecloth like blood. Lily gasped, tears springing to her eyes. Lily, Mason, go to your rooms, Rebecca ordered, her voice shaking. Stay, I countered gently. This concerns you too. Rebecca stood abruptly. How dare you undermine me with my own children? How dare you steal from your mother and lie to your children? I responded. Remaining seated and calm, Rebecca stormed out, the front door slamming behind her. Through the window, I watched her car screech away from the curb. Lily's small voice broke the silence. Is it true, Grandma? Mom's been stealing from you? I sighed deeply. It's complicated, sweetheart. Your mother has been keeping money that legally belongs to me, and saying some untrue things about me. Like when she tells people you're confused and forgetful? Mason asked quietly. I nodded, surprised. You knew about that? She tells everyone, her friends, our teachers, even the neighbors. His expression was solemn beyond his years. But you're not confused. You remember everything. That night, Rebecca didn't return home. At midnight, my phone rang. The local police department. Rebecca had been pulled over for suspected DUI, but released with a warning after I confirmed I would pick her up. When I arrived at the bar, she was slumped in a booth, makeup smeared, eyes unfocused. Come to gloat? She slurred as I helped her to the car. No, Rebecca. I came because you're still my daughter. A daughter you're accusing of theft, she spat. A daughter I'm finally holding accountable, I corrected. The officer who had pulled her over approached us as we left. Mrs. Walker, he said quietly. I'm Officer Daniels. Rebecca and I were in the same class at Boston College. I've let her off with a warning this time, but I want to be clear. This is a one-time courtesy for an old classmate. If I or any of my colleagues encounter her driving under the influence again, especially with children in the vehicle, there will be formal charges. He handed me his card. We've received reports before about your daughter's driving. She's been fortunate to avoid serious consequences so far, but her luck is running out. Please call me if you need assistance. As I drove us home, Rebecca stared out the window, suddenly small and vulnerable. "What happens now?" she whispered. "That depends on you," I answered truthfully. "But things can't continue as they have been." For the first time in years, I was the one in control of our relationship. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Rebecca's life began unraveling with startling speed. The morning after her DUI incident, she received a call from her boss requesting an urgent meeting. That evening, she returned home ashen-faced. "They're investigating discrepancies in client accounts," she muttered, pouring herself a large glass of vodka. "Someone made an anonymous ethics complaint." I hadn't been behind the complaint, but I wasn't surprised. People who manipulated finances in one area of life rarely limited their dishonesty to a single domain. "Maybe you should drink some water instead," I suggested, eyeing the alcohol. She glared at me. "Don't pretend to care now, Mother. Not when you're obviously enjoying watching me fall apart. I don't enjoy seeing you self-destruct, Rebecca. I never have." The next blow came when Rebecca was confronted with the reality that her attempted sale of my vacation property had been blocked. The buyer had contacted her directly, informing her that the transaction was flagged as fraudulent. "What did you do?" she demanded, cornering me in the kitchen. "I protected what's mine," I replied calmly. "Something I should have done years ago." Her face contorted with fury. "You ungrateful—" She stopped herself as Mason entered the room, his eyes wary as he assessed the tension. He was carrying one of Robert's old astronomy books. "Grandma says this was Grandpa's," he said cautiously. "You never told me he loved stars, too." Rebecca's expression flickered between rage and disbelief. "You're turning my own children against me now?" "No one's turning anyone against you, Rebecca," I maintained my composure. "I'm simply sharing their grandfather's memory with them." Later that day, Rebecca discovered Lily had entered the school art show, something she would have forbidden as a distraction from academics. When she saw Lily's drawing, a family portrait showing Rebecca as a distant, intimidating figure while I was portrayed as nurturing and protective, something inside her snapped. "This is how you see me?" she screamed, tearing the drawing to shreds while Lily watched in horror. "Mom, stop!" Mason tried to intervene. "Stay out of this!" Rebecca turned on him. "Both of you go to your rooms now!" After the children fled upstairs, Rebecca rounded on me, trembling with rage and alcohol. "You're ruining everything. First Dad, now my children." "What are you talking about, Rebecca?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Dad only ever talked about you. Eleanor is perfect. Eleanor is brilliant. And now you're doing the same thing with my children, turning them against me." For the first time, I saw clearly the root of Rebecca's resentment, a childhood perception of competition that had festered into adult hatred. She'd never felt good enough compared to me in Robert's eyes, a wound she'd carried into motherhood. "Rebecca," I said gently, "your father adored you, and I have never tried to compete with you for your children's love." "Liar!" she spat. "You've always been so smug, so perfect, the brilliant professor everyone admired. Do you know what it's like growing up in that shadow?" "No," I admitted. "Just as you don't know what it's like having your daughter steal your livelihood and dignity." By this point, word had begun spreading through our neighborhood and social circles. Our next-door neighbor, Martha, who had witnessed Rebecca's drunken arrival home several times, stopped me during my morning walk. "Eleanor, is everything all right? We've heard shouting, and frankly, some of us have been concerned for a while." She hesitated. "Several neighbors have noticed Rebecca's difficulties, and how wonderful you are with those children." I was stunned to discover an entire network of neighbors had been silently observing the situation, many having their own suspicions about Rebecca's behavior. After years of isolation, I was discovering unexpected allies all around me. Later that week, I learned more about how Rebecca had manipulated the banking system when David Kessler shared his preliminary findings. "Your daughter's methods were sophisticated, but ultimately traceable," he explained. "She exploited her position at Meridian Bank in 3 primary ways. First, she scheduled major transfers during quarterly system maintenance windows when fraud detection was temporarily disabled. Second, she used her administrator credentials to override security flags on suspicious transactions. Third, she deliberately set the alert thresholds for the algorithms she managed just high enough that her own activities wouldn't trigger them." "How could she get away with this for so long?" I asked. Banking compliance departments operate on trust. They're the watchdogs of the institution. It's like letting the fox guard the henhouse. She also carefully timed her activities to coincide with annual external audits, knowing those periods create such a backlog of alerts that many smaller issues get overlooked. Additionally, she specifically targeted systems during transition periods when old monitoring was being phased out and new protocols weren't fully implemented. This explained how Rebecca had managed to divert so much money for so long without detection. Her professional expertise had become the perfect tool for her personal fraud. That evening, I called Dr. Chen to discuss the escalating situation. The children witnessed a concerning outburst, I explained. I'm worried about the emotional impact. This kind of volatility is precisely why I've been recommending professional support for the children, she replied. With your permission, I'd like to see them for an evaluation. We need documentation of how Rebecca's behavior is affecting them, both for their well-being and for any potential custody considerations. I agreed, arranging for the children to see Dr. Chen under the pretense of academic enrichment assessments, something Rebecca wouldn't object to. The next morning, Rebecca confronted me again, more sober but equally hostile. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? Revenge? Justice, I corrected, and protection for myself and the children. The children are fine, are they? I challenged. Mason is being bullied, but hides it because you've taught him that vulnerability is weakness. Lily has anxiety attacks trying to meet your impossible standards, and both of them are learning that love is conditional on performance. Rebecca's face flushed. How dare you critique my parenting? What would you know about raising children in today's world? I know that children need security, acceptance, and consistency. Things your drinking and emotional manipulation deny them. Her hand raised reflexively, but she caught herself before striking me. The near violence hung between us like a physical presence. Get out, she whispered. This is my house, Rebecca, I reminded her gently. And those are my grandchildren upstairs who need stability. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in our power struggle, Rebecca had no countermove. She'd lost control of the narrative, the finances, and increasingly, her children's trust. The castle of lies she'd built was crumbling, and we both knew it. The formal notice arrived on embossed legal letterhead, regarding irregularities in the administration of Robert Walker's estate. Rebecca stared at the document, her hands trembling. What have you done? She demanded, waving the paper in my face. What I should have done 5 years ago, I replied calmly, pouring my morning coffee. Thomas Wilkins will be conducting a full audit of all financial transactions since Robert's death. The blood drained from Rebecca's face. You can't do this to me. I'm not doing anything to you, Rebecca. I'm simply correcting what you did to me. Panicked, Rebecca turned to her last remaining leverage, the children. That evening, she gathered them in the living room for what she called a family meeting, strategically excluding me. From the hallway, I overheard her desperate attempt to manipulate them. Your grandmother is trying to take away our home, our future. She never really cared about us. Mason's voice was surprisingly firm. Then why does she help us every day while you're at work? Why does she spend her money on our activities? That's not her money, Rebecca snapped. That's family money that I manage. Is it true that Grandpa left money for Grandma that she never got? Mason asked point blank. The ensuing silence was deafening. I hadn't told Mason this. He must have overheard one of my conversations with Wilkins when he came to borrow a book from my room. Who told you that? Rebecca finally demanded. No one, Mason replied. I heard Grandma talking to someone on the phone. Lily's small voice piped up. If Grandma doesn't care about us, why does she stay with us every day? Rebecca's response became increasingly erratic. It's all lies. Your grandmother is confused about finances. She always was terrible with money. When the children's skeptical expressions made it clear they weren't convinced, Rebecca lost control. You don't understand anything. This house is mine. I deserved everything Dad left. He always preferred her to me, and now you do too. Turning toward the doorway where I stood, she screamed, I want you out of this house by tomorrow. The children watched in horror as their mother's carefully maintained facade crumbled, revealing the bitter, insecure woman beneath. Later that night, I found Mason at my bedroom door, his expression grave beyond his years. I want to help, Grandma. Help with what, sweetheart? With proof. He pulled out his phone, showing me recordings of Rebecca's drunken rants, moments when she'd belittled the children. even an incident where she'd passed out on the couch while supposed to be supervising them. Mason, when did you record these? After Dad started building his case, he explained quietly. We've been sending him videos for over a year now. He says it's important to have lots of evidence. James, Rebecca's ex-husband, had instilled this protective instinct before moving across the country. I felt a new appreciation for the man I'd previously judged for his distance. The next day brought a surprising development. James called me directly, something he'd never done before. Eleanor, I've been building a case for custody since December 2021, he explained. That Christmas visit when I found Rebecca unconscious was my wake-up call. She had convinced the court during our divorce that I was unreliable and possibly unstable. Classic projection of her own issues. Rebecca destroyed my reputation locally after our divorce, making it impossible for me to find work in Boston. I had to relocate to rebuild my career, but I never abandoned my children. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. Rebecca convinced me you sided with her completely, he admitted. She showed me messages from you that were clearly fabricated, I now realize. It wasn't until Mason started mentioning your support that I understood you might be an ally, not an enemy. This revelation completed another piece of the puzzle. Rebecca had isolated us from each other, maintaining control through division. By this point, Rebecca's professional situation had deteriorated further. Her employer had placed her on administrative leave, pending an investigation. Several of her colleagues had come forward with accounts of her erratic behavior, missed deadlines, and questionable financial decisions. The carefully constructed professional image she'd maintained was crumbling under scrutiny. Parents from the children's school had begun to distance themselves. Playdates were canceled. Birthday party invitations stopped coming. Word had spread through the parent community about Rebecca's drinking, fueled by observations at school events where she'd appeared visibly intoxicated. At breakfast, Rebecca made one last desperate attempt to reassert control. I've spoken with Dr. Mercer, she announced, naming our family physician. He agrees that Mom's behavior suggests cognitive decline. He's recommended a neurological evaluation. I smiled calmly. Interesting, since I spoke with Dr. Mercer yesterday. He has no concerns about my cognitive function, and was quite surprised to hear about the medical documentation you've apparently been providing without my knowledge. Rebecca's spoon clattered against her coffee cup. In fact, I continued pleasantly, he suggested that someone in the household might benefit from substance abuse evaluation, but it wasn't me. The children exchanged glances, and for the first time, I saw something shift in their perception of their mother. Not hatred or fear, but a dawning recognition that the adult they'd trusted implicitly was deeply, fundamentally flawed. Dr. Chen's preliminary evaluation of the children had confirmed my fears. Both exhibited signs of anxiety and emotional trauma, consistent with living in an environment with an alcoholic parent and psychological manipulation. Her professional assessment would prove crucial in the legal proceedings to come. Rebecca's carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, and we all knew it. The only question remaining was whether she would choose redemption or destruction as her path forward. Rebecca's professional life imploded spectacularly when her employer finalized their investigation and discovered she had falsified financial reports. Her termination letter cited ethical violations incompatible with company values and explicitly mentioned potential criminal referrals to regulatory authorities. That evening, she arrived home in a state I'd never seen before. Mascara streaked down her face, hair disheveled, eyes wild with panic. "This is all your fault," she hissed as she stumbled through the front door. "Your choices led to this, Rebecca," I replied gently. "Not mine." The children had grown increasingly wary of their mother's volatile behavior. When Rebecca attempted to reassert authority through harsh punishments, grounding Mason for a minor infraction, confiscating Lily's art supplies, her son responded with devastating clarity. "You always taught us to value honesty," he said, standing taller than I'd ever seen him. "Was that all a lie?" Rebecca's hand shook as she poured herself another drink. "Go to your room. Just like you go to yours when you can't face things," he challenged. Her palm connected with his cheek before either of us could react. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. Mason touched his face, eyes wide with shock rather than pain. In that moment, something final broke between mother and son, a trust that might never be fully repaired. "Mason," I said quietly, "please take Lily upstairs. After the children left, Rebecca collapsed into a chair, shaking. I didn't mean to. But you did, I interrupted. Just like you didn't mean to steal my pension, forge my signature, or lie about my mental capacity. Yet you did all those things, Rebecca. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Her voice cracked with desperation. My job is gone, my reputation ruined. And who is responsible for that? She stared at me with naked hatred. You planned this all along, didn't you? You're happy now that you've destroyed my life? I shook my head sadly. No, Rebecca. You built your life on lies. I simply let the truth come to light. That evening, I called Dr. Chen to report the physical altercation. This is escalating beyond emotional abuse, I said, my voice shaking. I'm worried about the children's safety. Document everything, she advised. I'm going to recommend an emergency custody evaluation based on what I've observed in my sessions with the children and this new incident. The formal audit of Robert's estate had confirmed what I already knew. Rebecca had diverted over $200,000 meant for me, spent exactly $774,000 from my home sale proceeds, and made repeated attempts to transfer property ownership fraudulently. The house was legally mine. The vacation property she'd attempted to sell remained in my name. More damaging was the police report filed after Rebecca drove intoxicated with the children in the car, being stopped by an officer who, out of professional courtesy, had called me instead of arresting her. Child Protective Services had been notified, recommending Rebecca seek treatment for alcohol dependency. The criminal implications were now unavoidable. The district attorney's office had opened an investigation into financial elder abuse and fraud based on the forensic accountant's findings. Rebecca would likely face criminal charges regardless of how we proceeded with the civil case. I could lose my children, she whispered, the reality finally sinking in. I could go to jail, or you could get help, I suggested, for yourself and for them. Cooperate with the investigation, make restitution, and focus on recovery. That night, as the house grew quiet, Rebecca appeared at my bedroom door, sober and seemingly contrite. I've been thinking about what you said, she began hesitantly, about getting help. For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. That would be a positive step, Rebecca. I'll do it, she said, tears flowing freely. I've been so awful to you, to the kids. Dad was right to worry about me. I embraced my daughter for the first time in years, feeling her body shake with sobs. We'll get through this together, I promised. But morning brought a different Rebecca, calculating, defensive, denying she had any problem with alcohol. When I gently suggested treatment was necessary for the children's well-being, she reverted to manipulation. You really think anyone would believe you against me? She sneered. A confused old woman against a devoted mother? The transformation was chilling. From tearful remorse to cold calculation in the span of hours. I realized then that true change wouldn't come easily, if at all. Rebecca, I said quietly, the documentation doesn't lie. The recordings don't lie. Recordings? Her face paled. Mason has been documenting your behavior for months, I explained. Not because I asked him to, but because he was afraid for himself and his sister. This revelation seemed to break something fundamental in Rebecca. My own son has been spying on me? She whispered. Your son has been protecting himself the only way he knew how, I corrected gently. Meanwhile, James had filed for emergency custody proceedings from Seattle, coordinating his legal strategy with mine. Dr. Chen's professional evaluation would play a crucial role, as would the extensive documentation of Rebecca's financial fraud and alcohol abuse. Wilkins warned me the legal battle would be difficult. Courts are generally reluctant to remove children from a biological parent's custody, he explained. But with the combination of financial elder abuse, documented alcohol issues, and professional psychological evaluation, we have a strong case for temporary custody while Rebecca completes mandatory treatment. The process would be lengthy, potentially 8 to 12 months, but we had laid careful groundwork with proper documentation and professional assessments. The court appointed a guardian ad litem to represent the children's interests, a positive sign that their well-being was being taken seriously. Rebecca's expression hardened into something cold and unrecognizable. This isn't over, she warned, turning to leave. Not by a long shot. As she walked away, I felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for what could have been, and a steely resolve for what must come next. The battle for my grandchildren's future had entered its final phase, and surrender was not an option. 1 year later, I sit on the balcony of my new apartment, watching Mason adjust his telescope toward the evening sky. My life has transformed in ways I never imagined possible when I first discovered Robert's hidden documents. The legal battle was grueling, with Rebecca fighting every step of the way. The process took 9 months, far longer than we initially hoped. After she refused to attend 3 consecutive court hearings and another documented incident of neglect while intoxicated, we reached a turning point. Dr. Chen's testimony about the children's emotional state proved pivotal, as did the financial forensic evidence presented by David Kessler. The judge's decision was carefully considered. While this court recognizes the importance of maintaining the parent-child relationship, the evidence presented demonstrates a pattern of behavior that endangers the children's well-being. Temporary custody is granted to Eleanor Walker, with the condition that Rebecca Walker complete a court-approved rehabilitation program and therapy before supervised visitation can begin. The criminal case proceeded in parallel. Rebecca eventually accepted a plea deal on charges of financial elder abuse and fraud, receiving a suspended sentence conditional on full restitution, completion of an alcohol treatment program, and 3 years of probation. The leniency was largely due to her lack of prior criminal record and her eventual cooperation with authorities. James and I established a co-guardianship arrangement, with him relocating back to Massachusetts to a city 40 minutes away. The children spend weekends with their father, who has proven to be a much more engaged parent than Rebecca had led me to believe. My apartment, small but filled with light, sits near a park where Lily practices sketching landscapes. I've finally begun writing my memoir, working at the desk by the window while the children are at school. The working title sits atop the first page, Shadows of Silence, Finding My Voice After 60. Last month, I took the children to Italy for a 2-week trip, the vacation I'd postponed when Robert died. We visited Rome, Florence, and Venice, filling sketchbooks with drawings and journals with memories. Lily's Italian phrases improved daily, while Mason photographed every architectural detail that caught his eye. It was the trip of a lifetime, funded by the settlement from the financial abuse case that restored a portion of what Rebecca had taken. My former colleagues have become a vital support network. Sarah Peterson visits weekly, bringing books and academic gossip. I've even given a guest lecture at my old university, my first return to teaching in 6 years. Rebecca is now 8 months sober, attending daily meetings and weekly therapy sessions. Her progress has been uneven. 2 relapses in the early months, moments of bitter resentment alternating with genuine remorse. Through counseling, she's slowly beginning to confront the deep-seated resentment and rivalry she's harbored since adolescence. Her psychologist says it may take years to address her narcissistic tendencies and alcohol dependency. This isn't a fairy tale with a quick resolution, but a slow, imperfect healing process. The children continue their sessions with Dr. Chen, gradually processing the complex emotions surrounding their mother's behavior and the family upheaval. Mason's recordings proved instrumental in the custody hearing, though he still struggles with guilt about his role. "You didn't betray your mother," Dr. Chen reminds him in their joint sessions with me. "You protected yourself and your sister when the adults in your life should have been protecting you." Our neighbors and the school community have been surprisingly supportive. Ms. Patel, Mason's teacher, regularly checks in with updates on his academic progress. Several parents who previously distanced themselves have reached out, acknowledging they should have intervened sooner when they noticed concerning patterns. During today's supervised visit, Rebecca's 5th, she brought me an unexpected gift, our old family recipe journal that she'd hidden years ago. "I found this among my things," she said, her voice unsteady. "I think it always belonged to you." I accepted the journal, recognizing in this small gesture a genuine step forward. There's no immediate forgiveness, some wounds cut too deep, but there's an opening for healing. "My therapist says it will take years to rebuild what I destroyed," Rebecca admitted, looking thinner but clearer-eyed than I'd seen her in years. "Do you think we can ever be a real family again?" "We are family," I answered truthfully. "We just need to learn how to be a healthy one." The path to this point wasn't easy. Rebecca initially fought the custody arrangement with every legal maneuver possible, even attempting to claim that James and I had conspired against her. The court-appointed guardian ad litem, who investigated the case, ultimately recommended against her having primary custody, citing consistent prioritization of personal interests over the children's well-being. It took 3 failed supervised visits, during which Rebecca appeared intoxicated, before she finally acknowledged her need for professional help. The court's ultimatum became impossible to ignore: complete rehabilitation or potentially lose all parental rights. That evening, after the children are asleep, I page through the old recipe journal. Between instructions for pot roast and apple pie, I find a note written in Robert's handwriting years ago. Eleanor, your greatest gift has always been seeing the best in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. Never lose that light. I close the journal and gaze out at the star-filled sky. For the first time in decades, I feel genuinely at peace, not because I've won a battle against my daughter, but because I've finally won the battle against my own silence. The revenge I planned wasn't about destroying Rebecca, but about reclaiming the truth and dignity stolen from me. In doing so, I broke a cycle that would have consumed another generation. Mason knocks softly before entering. Grandma, are you crying? I smile through my tears. Sometimes we cry when we finally find what we've been looking for. And what did you find? He asks, settling beside me. My own voice, I answer, embracing him, and the courage to use it. Later, as moonlight spills across my writing desk, I add a final sentence to today's chapter. The greatest power isn't in speaking loudly, but in refusing to remain silent when truth demands to be heard. Tomorrow brings another supervised visit, another therapy session, another day of rebuilding what was broken. The path forward isn't clear or easy, but for the first time in years, it's authentically mine to choose. And in that choice, that reclamation of agency, I found something I thought was lost forever. Not just my voice, but myself. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel and don't miss the next video with more stories that will touch your heart.